Welcome back to another edition of the podcast. And today we are doing our updated National League predictions, or some might say mid-season National League predictions. We are going to predict 1 to 24 from the National League as we're just over halfway through the season now. Paul, looking forward to this, looking forward to some more criticism in the comments.
Yeah, no, without a shadow of a doubt, Luke. It's it's almost like stick your hand up and where's the wind going to blow, because it's definitely a league this season that any team seems to be able to beat anybody else, and what we're looking at 10th, 11th, 12th upwards could be in that top 7. So really, really difficult. I think the bottom 4 may be slightly easier to predict. It might the difference might be where they finish, but yeah, it's a tough league. It's sort of really even. Is the gut feel that I get. So there's a few swaps around and a few. I don't think there's many surprises. I would imagine in what I've chosen.
Yeah, I've got a few surprises as we go further up the table. But just as obviously we did our original predictions, we'll be reacting to those and these come the end of the season. But when we did our original predictions, I think now, and they look very, very silly. And we're not people who just don't really take any notice of the transfer news. We do our research on predictions, so we feel we're in the best position for ourselves to actually feel that we can predict the league without coming across as we're talking out of our arse, if that makes sense. Of course, at times we will anyways, as you naturally do. But I think you look at it now and it's like, how do you get a good set of predictions? It's more or less impossible in my opinion. But nevertheless, we are going to get on with it. Just before we do that, please remember to check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted. There'll be a link in the description for you to check them out, and you can get 50% off your card machine, no contracts or monthly fees. So, 24th place then. I've gone for Kidderminster. Who have you gone for?
I've gone for Kidderminster Harriers.
We've both agreed on that.
Yeah.
And I do remember that they were a side that we predicted to go down at the start of the season. So far, so good for that prediction, I would say. 20 goals scored all season in 28 matches. Yeah, it's not been the best season, has it, for Kidderminster so far?
No, and I know they've changed their manager this week, and you'd hoped for that new manager bounce that we've talked about on the pod over the last few weeks, Luke. But the stats speak for themselves, don't they? Like, is it 0.7 goals per game? They've amassed 6 out of the last 30. They're 7 points. I think it's 7 or 8 points clear of getting out of it, let alone trying to climb up the table. So if it's taken them 30 points to get 6 points, how long more is it going to take them to get that 6 to 8? And the other thing is, when you look at it, they played 28 games this season, which is the most that any club has played. There's a few others that have played 28, and there's teams around them that have played 27, 26, 25. So they've only got games in hand over Kiddie. So that I know you've got to win games in hand, but I would suggest the odds are stacked against them with a new manager or not.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with that, to be honest. I think there's only so much a manager can do with a squad. I know we talk about new manager bounce, but you can't fix something like that, where I personally think the squad's just not good enough, to be honest. When I look at that squad, I said at the start of the season I was a little concerned on goals going forward. I felt that might be where the downfall would be, and I think I predicted them to go down. I believe you did as well. I didn't expect them to come bottom, and I thought they'd be a bit better going forward than what I've seen. And it doesn't feel like there's much funding there to bring in players or prepared to spend money to bring in players. We've seen Tollitt come in. He hasn't made the impact that I thought he would. Hobson's come on loan, looked decent, I'd thought. Mateo's just signed for them. He has actually scored, but I just look across that squad and I just don't see enough goals there to warrant a place next season in the National League. 23rd then, who have you gone for, Paul?
I've gone for Oxford City.
We're agreeing on these. Oxford, I've gone for Oxford City as well in 23rd place. Of course, the joint worst defence in the division at the moment. They've had 1 win in 8. They've got 5 massive matches coming up. I believe they've got York, Kidderminster, Fylde, Boreham Wood, a lot of sides down there who they've got coming up, and I think that's going to define their season, these next 5 games.
Yeah, and I know I've sort of said on weeks gone by, I think I've got a feeling, I was always got a feeling that Oxford would be the team out of that bottom 4 that might get out, but that their form hasn't improved enough. And then when in the cold light of day, when you start looking at this over the next 3 to 4 months, I just don't think they've got quite enough. And it was always going to be an uphill task for Oxford City. They've had to fund a new improved infrastructure at their ground. They've had to relay the pitch for a better quality 3G. So, funding probably for the squad is not going to have been there. Trying to attract players, with all due respect to Oxford City, over some of the other National League clubs is a really tough ask. And you're probably going to be just that little bit short of the quality across the squads. They've got good individual players, and they've picked out some really good individual sort of games and results. But stringing those together for someone like Oxford City, new to the league, a bit like Kidderminster, it's tough. And I just can't see them getting out of that bottom 4, unfortunately.
Stuff when they get a win, and I think they have surprised me a little so far. I know they sit 22nd, but spent a fair bit of time outside of that relegation zone as well. And I predicted them to finish bottom at the start of the season, and they've certainly surprised me so far. But it's always difficult for your new sides that are unaware of the division, especially when you're part-time. We've seen a lot of sides like your Haverton Waterloovilles, your Weymouths, who've struggled in recent years when they've come into the division, because it's a very, very different division and a lot more difficult to a majority part-time league in the National League South compared to a majority full-time league in this league. And it's hard for any team to adjust. And I just think for Oxford, it's just one step too far for them to survive. And I think, they get a win and then they then go and lose, and they just can't get a run together in that consistency. And, that could be all that it takes to pull them away from the relegation zone. But for me at the moment, it's not looking good for them. 22nd place then. Who have you gone for, Paul?
Ebbsfleet United.
We're agreed again on Ebbsfleet United. Yeah, another side that got promoted in the summer. They've had 2 wins in 15. They've lost to a lot of sides around them, which is one of the major concerns for me, losing to Kidderminster, Oxford, Dorking. And I think what also is quite concerning is they actually start the season very well and win the playoff spots, yet they've fallen all the way down to now be in the relegation zone. Paul, what's your thoughts on Ebbsfleet?
Yeah, I think you're right, Luke. Their form is the one thing that is concerning, isn't it, in terms of 2 wins in 50. I happened to watch them live on Saturday. They did beat Wealdstone, and they were full credit to them. They deserved the win. There was this discussion amongst the Stonecast crew, and we spoke about on the pod that the amount of goals they've let in and the fact they get caught on the ball at the back, and if we could exploit that as a Wealdstone team that were playing well, then we'd probably win. As it was, they held on. I think it's probably not often that they get to go 1-0 up, 2-0 up in a game, and they had something to hold on to. And I think that's where they hopefully will try and improve. The problem is with Ebbsfleet, having seen them live, I can see why they are near the bottom, because if Wealdstone had scored the goal, I think they would have gone on and won comfortably, because they were the better football team. So I mean, Ebbsfleet, I suppose what is a little bit going from them, they've got a little bit of experience in there. They showed resolution on Saturday, and if they can show that across a few more games, then they're probably going to get more points than they've got up till now in the last 15 games. So the problem is, I don't think there's teams worse than them in the league, if that makes sense. And I know we can say that about any team that's lower than anyone else, but of that bottom 4, you'd have thought they would probably be the best equipped to stay in it, and I just don't think they quite got it.
I predicted them, I think, to finish something like 13th, 12th at the start of the season. I thought they would shock the division because they were so good last season in the league below, and they dominated that division. And in the FA Cup, of course, I saw them live against Halifax, and I thought, this is a very good footballing side, high pressing, but not just a good footballing side in possession base, but actually fast progressive kind of football, and it was actually quite nice on the eye. Where this season it started like that, and then now it's kind of turned to a proper traditional lower side in the division that's basically fighting for their lives. And for me personally, I just don't think there's enough quality from what I've seen in the last couple of months for them to survive this season. Well, 2 wins in 15 games, it's not good enough.
No, and the thing is, they've got Dominic Polian up front. He was almost playing like on a sort of wide of the three up top.
Yeah,
I think McQueen was playing on the wing, and I mean, bearing in mind with the game on Saturday, they won the game. One was from a free kick, one was from a penalty. So there wasn't a huge amount of creation outside of those set pieces as well, which again is if you're relying on set plays and dead balls, etc., and you're not got the quality like Wrexham had last year when they were relying on it, then you're probably not going to score too many goals that way. So, Dominic Polian certainly got to start scoring goals again. They got to look better up top. If they play as well as they did at the back, then they'll be okay. But if they're not doing one or the other or both, then they are banging trouble.
21st place then, and I've got a very bad feeling we might be agreeing again on this one. I've gone for Fylde, who was another side that got promoted this season. So I'm predicting all 4 sides that got promoted to go down. Do you agree, Paul?
Yeah, I've got AFC Fylde as 21st. A tough call there between 21st and whether they would survive.
Yeah.
They've obviously changed their manager recently. They've got they're well equipped with a full-time setup and that nice ground up there in the northwest. But yeah, the teams that are slightly above them have obviously got the experience in the National League, and I think that's where my sort of thoughts were going when you look at who's above them. We'll talk about those in a minute. They've just got a little bit more about them in the National League, knowing what the league is about, and that's where I think Fylde may just miss out. But if anyone does get up, I think it is going to be them.
Well, I think they're the best equipped to survive this season. When I've seen them, I don't see a bad football inside. I don't see a side that I think should be in the relegation zone. Of course, they've got games in hand at the moment, but it's another tale of they'll get a win against a very good side, and then you're thinking this is where they start to show what they're about, Fylde, and that identity about them. And then the following week, they'll go and lose to bottom of the league Kidderminster. There's just no consistency there or anything to really tell from what they're about as a football side. And I know a lot of people predicted them to be a bit of a shock, and obviously they've had that experience in the division a few years ago, and were always a side looking quite ambitious to get in the Football League with the funding that they've had, and they've had a few playoff appearances as well. But this season, I expected a lot more from them, especially with that squad. You look at Oldham, Gateshead, Rochdale. They've beaten 3 sides there that have all been in the playoffs at some point this season. Only 4 times have failed to score this season, so goal scoring clearly isn't a problem. The problem is, of course, that defensive line where they're leaking an awful amount of goals. They've got the joint worst defence in the division with Oxford. So for me, I think Fylde, personally, I think they want to survive and want to get out of the drop zone. I think going forward, the midfield and attack's fine. I just think they need a stronger back line. So for me, I'm unfortunately saying Fylde will come 21st. 20th, then the first side that's going to survive this season. Paul, who have you predicted?
I've gone with Dorking Wanderers.
We have boring predictions if we keep agreeing on this. I've gone for Dorking as well.
I mean, when you look at the league table now, there's not going to be a huge amount of change really, but Dorking they've been hit hard with injuries on key players, and they lost another McShane, wasn't it, at the weekend to an ACL injury. Mark White is relatively new to the National League, but they've been in there now. This is their 2nd season, so I just think he knows what it takes and what he'll go and sort of dig a few little gems out to get them over the line. He helped last year. He tied them up defensively last year, brought Tony Craig in at the back, who's got a bit of experience in the Football League, and I think he'll do probably a similar thing. And you've got to listen to Mark White and sort of appreciate what he says. And he sort of said the other day he's got enough in the building to win games and stay up. So I think they will, but it's probably not going to be a pretty end to their season.
I'd agree on that. Dorking are a side that I know a lot of people have had a lot of concerns for them dropping into the drop zone this season. Of course, they're hovering over now. The thing that makes me think they're going to survive is a lot on Mark White because of how successful he's been overall. And I think when it comes down to it, he won't allow this Dorking side to go down. He just won't allow it. And also what we seem to see with Dorking is when they do lose a game that maybe you'll think, why have they lost that? They always seem to put it right. For example, they lost to Oxford at home. That's a bad loss. And everyone after that loss were considering them being a side that they're going to go down, then they're going to drop into it. It's going to be a tough second half of the season for Dorking. Yet the following week, they'll go to Oxford away when maybe you'd expect them to win at home more than away. They go to Oxford, get the win. And it's the same every time. They'll lose a game that you think maybe they shouldn't have lost that. And then they'll go and grind a result out against a top side in the division, for example. You know, Halifax away, they won there. Hartlepool away. I know Hartlepool are down there, but at the time were a very good side near the top of the league. So for me, I just think Dorking last season, they know what this division's about now. When it comes down to it, they've got more experience than the four sides that are below them. And that's why I think they're just going to scrape over the line. But it's going to be a nervy end to the season, I think, for Dorking Wanderers fans. 19th then, who have you gone for?
York City.
I disagreed on one. I've gone for Dagenham and Redbridge.
Yeah, I mean, I look at York and, you know, I think their season up till now was summed up on Sunday. That they've had to rely on a 96-minute equaliser against a Boreham Wood team who at the moment are slowly improving, but are certainly nowhere near the levels that they've been in the last few years, both in the league and the cup. And yeah, I think the fact they've got Neil Ardley in charge is an absolute bonus to them. Maybe that, you know, that 19th position could be improved if they get a bit more quality through the door, because I just don't think they've probably got the quality that's required to push up the league. And that's been shown in their results so far. On paper, it seems to be, you know, that, and we've talked a lot about their beginning of the season and new ownership and the signings that's made, but they just haven't kicked on. Even with the new manager, they haven't kicked on. And I don't think there's enough there for them to be improving significantly this season. That's not to say that in the summer with Neil Ardley having his own pre-season, getting his own players in, they're going to be a different force and different reckoning next season without a shadow of a doubt. And I would never not say that, but I think this season is a case of let's just get it done and let's sort of start again in the summer.
Well, I've gone for Dagenham and Redbridge, and of course they were a side at the start of the season a lot of people had concerns for. A lot of the squad had been dismantled, I think, with the amount of players that had left. Marias obviously left early on in the season. I think they lost the midfielder, Robinson. I think he left the club, didn't he, as well? And there were a lot of concerns about them being a side that were going to be quite underwhelming. And to be fair, I think most people would be correct. I actually think I predict them to finish in the division, in the position that they are in at the moment. 16th, I think, was where I predicted them. But the reason I'm predicting them a bit lower is I look at sides above them or even the likes below them who at the moment who I'm predicting higher in York and Woking. I think those sides are better equipped to going into the second half of the season. We look at Dagenham and I just look across that side and I just think it's very, very average. There's no one there that stands out to me. Yes, Effing Young is a very good striker. I rate him quite highly, but he's 33 years of age. He's already had his injury issues this season. He's been out for a long time. Yes, he's come back and made an impact, but is he going to do that throughout a full season? So for me, Dagenham, they're just a side that I just can't see any improvement from their position at the moment going into the second half of the season, where sides below them, I can see them improving. So for me, Dagenham, I'm putting them in 19th place. 18th place then, Paul, who have you gone for?
I've gone with Woking.
I've gone for Maidenhead.
Oh, Maidenhead. Yeah, I mean, there could be an argument for anything. I mean, Woking, I've pushed Woking slightly up from where they are now because the managers come in, Michael Dawes come in. They're making those baby steps towards improvement. He's looking like he's he's going to do the job for them. But he's unproven at this level as a manager. He's certainly played at this level as a coach and as a player and coach at this level. So he's certainly going to be looking sort of to improve the fortunes. And like you said, they're going to be slightly better equipped, I think, than maybe York City and Dorking are to get up that league. There's any one of these teams in and around these positions could be sort of swapping and interchanging with each other because they're all very similar, both in form, quality, and consistency. But I think Woking again, a little bit like York, are just let's just get this done and crack on and build again in the summer.
Maidenhead them for me. Maybe a bit of a low prediction considering that the 13th at the moment. But what we saw last season, and I could see a similar kind of pattern, is this time last season, no one would question them about being involved in a relegation battle. I don't think they will be. I think being in 17th, you'll be too high up to go down this season. Well, not go down, but be considered in that relegation battle. And for me, I just look at Maidenhead and I just think them being part-time, second half of the season, it's going to be tough. Players are going to tire. Other teams have more behind them where they've got more training. There'll be more people behind the scenes there because Maidenhead are a part-time side and you don't have that regular meeting with the manager like you do if it's full-time and people behind the scenes. You've got a job as well as, playing for a football club. And I think that's quite difficult to balance. And it always feels like towards the end of the season, Maidenhead do seem to struggle because of that when, they're starting to tire and other sides might be getting stronger towards the end of the season to have that final push. We talked about them at the start of the season maybe going down. I think we can both agree it's very unlikely they will now. But, you just look, 1 goal in the last 5 games. They've had 1 win in that time as well. They're well known for grinding out these results when they need to. Similar to Dorking in the way that they will grind out results when they need to. You don't really know what to expect from them. 1 week they could be top of the league Chesterfield. Next week they could lose to bottom of the league Kidderminster. They're very unknown, I think, to talk what to expect from them. But for me, I just look at that and I look at the lack of goals. I think they're going to start slipping down the table in the second half of the season. So for me, Maidenhead will finish there. Next place then, who have you gone for, Paul?
What are we at now? 17th?
17th.
Well, I've gone with Dagenham and Redbridge, but I think my sentiments are similar to yours, Luke, in as much as it was underwhelming in terms of their recruitment. Obviously, Ben Strevens came in the back of last year, and they almost started asset stripping as soon as he came in. So he's had a really difficult job, and I know that the fans have been up against him a little bit, and their performances probably haven't warranted any sort of signs of joy, I guess, for the supporters. So you can see probably why they're upset. The challenge for Dagenham going forward, Luke, is that their American investors have sort of turned around and said they're pulling some funding or they're going to put so much in and they're looking to sell their shares. So that's really going to be difficult in as much as trying to sort of consolidate financially as well. So it'd be interesting to see how that affects them sort of this season going into next. But I don't know. Like I said, they could be anywhere. I think they've got enough to stay up and they've done enough so far.
I've gone for Woking then in 17th place. Of course, they've probably been one of the most underwhelming sides this season. A lot of people are very disappointed with them. They had a very good season last season, and I think a lot of people expected them to build on it, especially with keeping the majority of the squad together and just adding to it. Maybe that was the issue, adding too many players. You don't know your best lineup. And of course, we've seen a departure there in the manager, in Darryl Sile. Michael Doyle's come in a few weeks ago. He's got a win. He's also had 1 or 2 defeats as well. That leads to Solihull and Aldershot. Is there any shame in that when those two are in the playoffs? That's something for you guys and Woking fans to decide. But for me, I think Michael Doyle, the impression that I get is he's going to be a very good manager. We've seen Dion Kelly-Evans has come in. He's got that experience, what he had with Notts County. And I think overall, you look at that Woking squad, it's not a squad that should be down there. They've had an awful first half of the season. They've changed the manager now. I think if you can get the right man in, which I think they have with Michael Doyle, and you get the best out of this squad, this squad will start flying up the league table. And for me, I think they'll move from 20th up to 17th. 16th place then, Paul. Who you gone for?
Hartlepool United.
I've gone for York.
Yeah, I mean, Hartlepool, they're just, again, if you look at Hartlepool, Woking, York, they are underachieving a little bit, aren't they? And we spoke, I think, at length at Hartlepool on the pod last week. Again, another team that are going to have changed their manager in hope that that will sort of reverse their fortunes. And they've got a few injuries. We know that Mancini is back, but I think someone's sort of commented on your Twitter feed tonight that one man doesn't make a team. And again, I think their quality for National League level has been decimated with the injuries, but I don't think they've had quite enough there consistently either to sort of mount any playoff challenge, which I'm surprised about, because I thought, they came into this league, they did it quietly. None of their fans gave it the big one. They've been here before. They absolutely romped the league a few years ago. The last time I saw Hartlepool play, they beat Wealdstone 7-2 at the Vale and absolutely wiped the floor with them. And they were champions, etc. A few weeks later. So it's surprising to see them having dropped out of the EFL to sort of be in that lower half of the National League as it is. But I can't see them getting any higher at this point, unfortunately.
I've gone for York in 16th, and of course eyebrows were raised at the start of the season. Well, in pre-season when Matt Ugler took over the club from Henderson previously. A lot of York fans, I think, were quite optimistic about him coming in because of the bad time that they've had in the past with the lack of investment into the actual team and the facilities. And I think overall, it feels like Matt Ugler clearly does care about York. Has the recruitment been spot on? No. Has it particularly been good? I think there's questions to be asked about that. Have they recruited in the right areas? Have they maybe just flexed their muscles in the players that they've tried to bring in, and maybe they should have thought a bit more about that? But I personally think Ugler and the team behind there, who the recruitment team, I think, seem to be learning with the players that they've recruited most recently. Billy Chadwick might not be the biggest name out there. He didn't particularly play much for Gateshead, but as I'm aware, and I think Gateshead fans will be aware as well, he's a very good striker and he's someone that can clearly score goals. And that's something that, I think York fans need, especially when Akiniemi's been out. They've missed him badly. And I think what sides who have got a lot of money need to do is show that we won't get affected like injuries like the smaller sides do. And I think this is where he's showing now, bringing in someone like Billy Chadwick, who's left Gateshead, and then permanently signing him from Stockport. We've seen improvements recently, unbeaten in 5 as well now. I think it is baby steps. I think where they were at the start of the season, it was horrendous. Ardley's come in, improved it. It's not been perfect for him so far, but I think they're slowly starting to improve. And for me, I think York will finish in a fairly respectable position considering how they started the season. So, yeah, York City in 16th place. 15th place then. Who have you gone for, Paul?
I've gone for Maidenhead United.
I've gone for your side, Wealdstone.
Wealdstone, yeah. I mean, very similar setups, aren't they? So, again, this mid-table, anywhere could be any team could be any position. I think Maidenhead will just consolidate what they've done. I think goal scoring is, like you've stated, is an issue, but that's not the only issue for Maidenhead. I think a lot of clubs are struggling for that. It's that $1 million question. If you can get a 20 goal a season striker, then you're not going to be in around 15th to sort of 20th. But I think Maidenhead just have that enough about them. They've got enough points on the board just to sort of consolidate where they are, because they sort of almost win one, lose one scenario. I know they're on a little bit of a poorer patch at the moment, but yeah, I think they'll consolidate at 15th. Alan Devonshire knows this league like nobody else knows. I think he's got to be the longest serving manager in this league by a country mile. So
Garrard, I think, will be one of those, I think.
Yeah, so he knows what it takes, and they defy the odds every year, don't they, Luke? We always sort of think, is this the season made and they're going down? And genuinely, I think they'll sort of consolidate in and around that 15th place.
Yeah. Well, I've gone for your side, Wealdstone, another part-time side. The problem I think with Wealdstone, I think it's been throughout the season is, and I've spoke about a lot about sides below them as well, about the issue, and it's a recurring issue with a lot of clubs, is consistency for the sides in the bottom half. And I think that has been an issue. You know, you feel like you're building on your away performances. That's obviously been a problem over the last 12 months. You feel like you're starting to see improvements, and then bang, you go and lose to a side in the relegation zone like Ebbsfleet away from home. And you know, I think as we saw last season with Wealdstone, they were in a similar position to what they were in now, maybe a little bit higher this time last season. And then as soon as injuries started to hit them in that second half of the season, we saw a drastic drop-off in Wealdstone. And, you know, they kind of, I wouldn't say scrape over the line because they were never in any danger, but the position that they finished in at the end was something like 15th, 16th, probably wasn't a true reflection of how they performed throughout the season. And I think, again, this season, when they're getting towards those final 10 games, they're going to start to struggle, especially if they're not consistent and injuries start to hit them like we've already seen this season. So for me, yeah, Wealdstone, I'm putting them in 15th place. Sorry, Paul. 14th place then. I've gone for Boreham Wood. Who have you gone for, Paul?
Yeah, I've gone for Boreham Wood as well.
Read again.
I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on Luke, but they are again slowly improving. Luke Garrett's again knows the league. They're massively underperforming, and like we've sort of stated in pods before, I think something's a little bit of a miss there over the last few years. Their recruitment wasn't really spot on, and the manager and their chairman have alluded to that, not so many words in interviews and YouTube videos and program articles, but yeah, I think they're strong, they're tough, they're a sort of a real good sort of your typical non-national league team, and they'll just slightly improve on where they are at the moment, but I don't think they're going to go too much higher than that. So that's why I've gone for them at 14th.
I think when you look at Boreham Wood this season, it does feel like it's a little dry there, mediocre and quite average there. You know, from what we've seen in previous years, Boreham Wood have always been a side that have been quite ambitious for, and it's no disrespect, but for the attendances that they get and for where they've come from historically, they're quite an ambitious club.
Yeah.
You know, last season finished in the playoffs. They've always been, but this season it's been a very stalemate season where they've just been bottom half, pondering in, maybe jumping into a more comfortable mid-table position. There's nothing really to talk about with them. You know, when we talk on a podcast on a weekly basis, there's not much to talk about with Boreham Wood apart from give you a prediction, because they're not going to go down. They're not going to get promoted. Nothing seems to be happening there. There's no player that's standing out. It's the same old faces, isn't it, season on season in the likes of Marsh, Firefield, you know, Unlove's there now. I thought he'd kick on this season and score more goals, and he hasn't really proven that and been that prolific goal scorer that I thought he would. They do get results when they need to, but you know, against the likes of York, Kiddie, Oxford, they're not losing to sides below them, which is always a positive, and it's why I just think they'll comfortably finish in 14th place for me. 13th place, then I've gone for Hartlepool. Maybe quite a high prediction for them. Who have you gone for, Paul?
I've gone for Wealdstone. And I looked at this subjectively, and bearing in mind that did cross, you know, go through my thoughts, Luke, that the back end of last season, Wealdstone lost a lot of form, sort of almost got themselves to the edges of the playoffs and then sort of dropped away. And the back end of the season, both it felt for fans and probably for players was, we're done, we're not going to go down, we're not going to get in the playoffs. And it kind of just, it did peter away slightly. So, you know, we were going into this season maybe a little bit concerned with what we were recruiting, because Stuart Maynard and Matty Saunders went with this sort of the bulk of the squad. He signed 16 from last year. So he went with the familiarity of what had got them to that point last season. And, you know, at times it was sort of how they're going to freshen up, what they're going to do. You could see the pros and cons of it. And clearly we've started well. The good thing about this season, Luke, is consistency at home is better. We've lost one game, you know, in the league. We lost to Dagenham and Redbridge. And apart from that, we haven't lost at home. And that's what I think will keep us in and around that 13th place, because our home form is dreadful. You know, one win in just over a year, and then we won 2 National League games away from home and an FA Trophy game. So we won 3 on the bounce, and we all thought, hey, here goes. You know, we're going into an Ebbsfleet team that are bereft of defensive confidence, and they played like their lives depend on it and beat us 2-0 on Saturday. So we sort of went back to square one. So I think what makes or break Wealdstone for me personally is this January period. We've got another 6 games now, which is going to be after Saturday. We then Tuesday, Saturday, including the likes of Southend twice. We've got Halifax. We've got an FA Trophy tie against Chelmsford, who are flying high in National League South. Aldershot. You know, we're playing teams in the top half of the table in January. So my prediction of 13th, I think, is a bold one. If you'd asked me this in February, depending on how they got, it might be slightly different. But I just think we're going to learn from last year. The quality is there. Stewie Maynard just brought in Aaron Henry back on loan from Charlton for the rest of the season. He adds a real piece of quality. If we can play him in the right position and get him into the how they've been playing, so it doesn't slow the game down too much, which is probably a little bit of a concern after Saturday. But all in all, I think we're not going to pull up any trees. We're not going to hit the playoffs. We're not going to go down, and we're going to be smack bang in the middle of that league at 13th.
I've gone for Hartlepool United then. Of course, there's been a lot of issues off the field and on the field in the last couple of months there. They had a very good start to the season under John Askey. Of course, after that first month or two, it did seem to go downhill, and it doesn't seem like it's got any better there, and it's led to John Askey being dismissed. Of course, at the moment, Leddy Lawrence is taking charge with Sweeney. I don't know if they're going to change that in the future and make a permanent manager instead of it being on an interim basis. But for me, the reason that I think Hartlepool will have a respectable second half of the season compared to where they are at the moment, I believe they're in 17th at the moment, 18th, 17th, 16th, something like that at the moment. Mancini's back, and at the start of the season, I know you've mentioned you can only one man doesn't make a team. At the start of the season, he was pivotal in that start, and as soon as he got injured, and of course the centre half in Dodds, it went downhill there. And I think a creative midfielder like that brings goals and goal contributions overall, for me, I think is something that they've certainly missed. And I think players like Manu Diasarue, Josh Umera, Gray, I think players like that will improve in the second half of the season, have a stronger, better half to the season, better than what Diasarue has had now, even though he's had quite a good first half. Because he's got service like that behind him, someone like Mancini. And I think if they do sign maybe a centre half, which I think is something that they will be looking to do, if that's on loan or as a transfer signing, for me, I think Hartlepool will finish in 13th place for me. 12th place then, Paul, who have you gone for?
Southend United.
I've agreed with you there on Southend United too.
Yeah, I mean, the embargo came a little bit too late for them, didn't they, to sort of try and push on, and their form has stuttered. I know they beat your boys on Saturday. Well, appears quite convincingly. You'll have more of a view on that, Luke, than I would. But I think it's all around what are they going to do now that the pressure's off of that embargo? The world's not against them, etc., etc. And they may react slightly differently, take their foot off the gas. I don't think they're going to go mad in recruiting big, but they're clearly looking at recruiting lads from the lower leagues to sort of build a squad. I mean, there's talk of them signing someone this week, isn't there? I can't remember the name's gone out off the top of my head. Having signed a lad from Western-super-Mare last week, so I think Southend are in a much, much better position clearly than they were a few weeks ago. And they are definitely going to be one of the favourites next season. I just don't think there's quite enough in the tank with that 10-point deduction to get them into that playoff picture, especially with some of the teams around them playing quite well as well at the same time.
I think the 10-point deduction is the reason that they won't be in that playoff mix overall, to be honest. They've done very well with such a small squad, and I mean an extremely small squad, times where they've had the likes of 12 players playing with one substitute on the bench. it's looking like brighter times ahead now for Southend United. But is the main focus on them, getting into the playoffs, or is it sorting everything off the field, bringing in players, building that squad, taking less pressure, taking the pressure off the players who, have been, working their socks off in the last couple of months and bringing in that extra bit of depth. And, when you bring I wouldn't say unsettle a side because it's not a negative, but when you're bringing in more players, to a certain extent, it is going to unsettle the side. And will those players who you've brought in have the quality to have a push to the second half of the season to get into the playoffs, especially with a point deduction like that? I personally think no. And I think the Arsenal is climbing up the table, but what we've got to remember is they're still in 17th place halfway through the season. It would take some doing to be in the top 10 come the end of the season. We've seen issues like they need to sign a striker. And there's also the question, is this squad actually good enough to make the playoffs? And for me, you give them the 10 points back. I think after that win against Halifax, I think they would just go inside the playoffs now. But it's not like they're comfortably inside the playoffs, and you need to be, if you didn't have that 10-point deduction, you'd need to be in like fourth, third, if that makes sense, to be in the playoffs come the end of the season. And, we talk about signing a striker. I think there's a good side there. But for me, I think overall, with the 10-point deduction, and I keep repeating that, I just think that's the reason that they can't compete in that top for that top 7 come the end of the season. 11th place then now. Who have you gone for?
I've gone for Gateshead.
Read again on Gateshead. Yeah, I've gone for Gateshead.
I think I can't remember which pod it was. Though it may have been when we had the Gateshead fans on, but we talked extensively about how well they were doing, but how important January would be to building their success. And losing Mike Williamson, would players come in and be poached? And it's exactly what has happened. I know they've lost one of their lads to an injury, so he hasn't left. But losing Wern, losing Mayer in goal, losing Lofthouse at fullback, Chadwick.
You're losing spine of your team, aren't you?
They've lost 6 players. 6 players. And I know when you look at someone like Gateshead and Wealdstone, they rely heavily on their loan market. And so it's a real hit and miss. And you've got that challenge of them getting called back. But listen, come on, to lose 6 players in the space of a week is going to affect anybody. And Gateshead haven't probably got the biggest squad. They probably haven't got the biggest budget, and they are punching above their weight. So I think they're going to be the ones that fall away out of that top 10, 11. And I think they're probably grateful now when they look at what they've lost in terms of their squad, that they've got so many points on the board that actually that's not going to adversely affect them going forward. Listen, they may bounce back, Luke. We don't really know what's going on in as much as what they're looking to sign to replace these lads. They may well bounce back and get the quality back, but that is a tough ask in January to replace 6 players in a team that have been playing well. So that's why I see Gateshead dropping out of that almost that. They were cemented in the playoff positions. I think they're going to drop into 11th.
I think we've seen in recent weeks a few bumps, haven't we, in the road for them? Of course, I think York, they drew 2 at home and then lost to them away. We've seen when the span of your team and when you're a side like Gateshead that clearly have an identity about them, you need specific players that are capable of playing that style. And now you've lost 6 of your players that a lot, I think 4 of them were regular starters in the side. You're going to struggle to replace them. And we've ultimately seen a lot of players being recalled who they learned out, Lewis Knight. And I see that as quite a concern for Gateshead, is the fact that it looks like these players that they've learned how, who they thought earlier in the season weren't ready to play in the first team on a regular basis. They're now going to be relying on those players to come in and fill the roles of the likes of Ween. And if Lewis Knight is someone that is going to play for Gateshead in the second half of the season and they're not going to bring in another player, I don't think he's capable of producing the numbers in goals and assists that Stephen Ween had. And for me, Chadwick, I know he wasn't playing consistently up top, but he was that extra goal option, and we've seen in games this season where he's scored a hat-trick even, and you losing a player like that, it's just another option that's gone. You're relying heavily on Dinanga now to score goals, who clearly hasn't been up to it in recent weeks, and there's also questions about him leaving too, and we haven't even talked about more injuries that could come to a squad like Gateshead, who overall have quite a small squad. So for me, Gateshead, I think if you're going to think of a side that's going to have quite a major drop-off in the second half of the season, I think Gateshead would be the side. 10th place then now. I've gone for Halifax. Who have you gone for, Paul?
I've gone with Rochdale. And my thinking around that is they've always been in and around the playoffs, but their managers had to register himself as a player because they're so beset with injuries. And clearly, if a manager's who's a footballer, he might not have played too many times recently. If a manager is registering himself to play in a game, to play in a squad, does that tell you that they haven't either got the finances or the ability to go and get other players that could take his place on the bench? So I don't know their financial situation, but that's what sort of smacked me in the face was why aren't they just going to go and find somebody else, which is easier said than done. I completely appreciate that. But to have to register yourself as a player, even if it's in the short term, it is quite damning at a National League level. So I just think that is going to affect them. And that's why they're not going to push into that top 7 or 8 that they sort of are at the moment. So similar to Gateshead, I think they're the ones that are going to get rocked slightly at the back end of this season.
Well, I've gone for my own team, Halifax. You might call me a bit negative because I've predicted a side that's been in the playoffs, been just outside of the playoffs. We've never really looked like we're going to finish in 10th place this season, but it is so tight. If you look at it, there's I think goal differences from something like 6th to 9th. It was the other day anyway, before the Southend game. It's games like that, though, that I'll go back to. Southend away from home, getting battered there. When you're not winning your home games like you should against Altrincham at home, Rochdale at home, games that were there for the taking, you've got to be grinding out results away. And overall, yes, we've done that throughout the season, but at Southend, we certainly weren't up to the standard that they were. And you might be saying I'm going off one game here, but I can speak about many games where you think we should have won that game or we should have scored there. It's an issue that I keep coming back to. I've mentioned this on this podcast more or less every single week. We don't score enough goals and we clearly need a striker. Now, I don't know if we don't have the funds to go out there and get a striker. But if we don't get a striker, I don't think we're going to be finishing in these playoffs. I think another thing to go back to for that Southend game was Millie Ali was out injured. Now, the majority of the division will be aware of Millie Ali and will see him as the main danger man. When he was out injured, we had nothing going forward. We never looked like scoring. And, when you're relying on a player like that that's just gone and got injured, you're not going to be in a good position. And it's always the same with your clubs like your Halifaxes, your Gatesheads. They're always going to struggle from injuries throughout the season. And for me, when players start to get injured, which they will and which they have done already this season, I just don't think there's enough in the tank for us to push over that line and cement ourselves in the playoffs, because we haven't so far this season. And we've got some bogey teams coming up against the likes of Maidenhead, Solihull, sides at home that are going to give us difficult games, which they have done over the last couple of seasons. So for me, I just think we're just not good enough going forward for ourselves to cement ourselves in the playoffs come the end of the season. 9th place then. I've gone for Rochdale. Who have you gone for, Paul?
Eastleigh. Gone for Eastleigh. They've quietly gone about their business, haven't they? Got Richard Hill back. I know he's familiar with the club, and they've shown more consistency. The thing with Eastleigh is that they're still in the FA Cup. They've got a great draw at Newport. They've got to go to Newport away, and it looks like they're going to be playing Man United down at Eastleigh if they beat Newport. So and they probably are they still in the FA Trophy? And if they are, they've still got cup games to worry about. And I think that may be what will hinder them slightly is the number of games that are going to come up. But listen, they've got a vast amount of experience, and Paul McCullum's sort of started to show his worth, and Chris Maguire clearly has got experience and quality from his SPL days, and they're a team we don't talk a lot about, and it's not because of the fact that they're doing badly or doing very well. They just sort of go along and just carry on and show a bit more consistency. Will get them into enough. I don't think they've quite got enough for that playoff when you look at the teams that are above them. But again, if you think about next season, and we've talked about easily over the last few seasons being a playoff contender, they certainly, if they keep this form up, they're certainly going to sort of look to confidence next season. But just a bit too much for them this year, so I'll put them in 9th place.
Now I've gone for Rochdale, and a lot of similar points to yourself. I think injuries has clearly affected them. Like you mentioned, when a manager's having to register himself on the bench, the side's having a lot of issues. And I go back, and I know I've mentioned it with a few clubs like Hartlepool, Southend, about issues off the field, and I think it clearly is there. If Rochdale aren't capable of bringing in players, there's clearly something going on behind the scenes there. I don't think they're in the best position financially at the moment. I don't think many sides are when they come from the Football League and come into this division, especially for the first time. Most sides do often come in and have a lot of financial issues, like we saw with Southend when they came down, like we've seen with Hartlepool, Rochdale now, Scunthorpe, Oldham. And when they're having a lot of injury problems to key players as well, the likes of Rodney, who's a quality striker, Sinclair's had his issues, Cairo Mitchell, I believe, still out injured. You're losing key players going forward. And you can see in results like losing to Fylde away from home, it's affecting them. And for me, I just think overall, I look at that side and I look when it starts getting damaged with injuries. And I think, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to be consistent enough to cement yourself in the playoffs, which is something that they haven't actually done. I don't actually think, although they've been always in and around the playoffs, I don't think they've actually entered into those playoffs come 5 o'clock on a Saturday in a number of weeks, or I think throughout the entire season. So for me, I think Rochdale will finish just outside of the playoffs. But I do think from 10th onwards, I think it'll be very tight. 8th place then, Paul, who have you gone for?
Aldershot Town.
I've gone for Altrincham, and a lot of people will probably say that's quite... I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, because you look at Altrincham and they've certainly had a very good start to the season. There's any issues there when you look at them. It's not like they're another side that, I won't say go about it quietly, but they're still bringing in players. They're not getting particularly hampered by injuries, but I just think that you can tell they rely heavily going forward on Con Clark. They're a side that don't have a goal scorer, and I think if you want to be in those playoffs, I know they've done so well so far, you need a prolific goal scorer, and I know Con Clark has been that, but he's not that out-and-out striker. And when I've seen him in both games when they came to the Shea and when we went there, I just don't think... I think the 7 teams better than them overall, and I think over the course of the season, that will tell. I think defensively, you'll be able to get at I think injuries as well. I know they've been affected by it so far, but I think, if someone like Con Clark got injured, they've been quite fortunate he hasn't. And if he did get injured, I think going forward, you'd be struggling. And I think Altrincham, they haven't actually had a bad patch yet. Every side will. It'll be telling when they start losing 1, 2, 3 games. And it's not the best time to be talking about Altrincham in a negative fashion after they've just beaten Barnet. But I think I'm thinking of it over the course of the season, and a lot of things can happen in almost a half a season yet to be played. 8th place, Paul. Who was it you went for again?
Aldershot, yeah. Listen, they've been very impressive. They've probably been, most improved team of the season, haven't they? And they've got to be up there for a team of the season, no matter where they finish. Tommy Widgeon's really got them playing, and they've had a brilliant cup run. They lost 4-1 to West Brom at the weekend, but it's no shame in that. And they, took 4,000 fans and all that sort of thing. So the town is buoyed by the what Aldershot Town are doing at the moment on the field. So I think they're quite a young side, aren't they? They've got good. They've recruited really well from lower leagues and out of academies, and I don't think this year they're going to quite have enough to get into that playoffs. They do let goals in. Hence why, you'll see who I've got sort of 7th and upwards. They could be the surprise package that push into the playoffs, but I just think they may just drop short. There's other teams in there have got a little bit more experience, either higher up the Football League or playoffs as well. So I just got a gut feel that they're the ones that will be, unfortunately, the ones to miss out.
7th place, then the first playoff position. Who have you gone for, Paul?
Well, much to your disgust, Luke, I would imagine, I've gone for your team, FC Halifax. Now, my problem is, obviously, we didn't discuss these before we've gone live, so we're hearing these for the first time, and your synopsis of FC Halifax is starting to really worry me about the fact I've put them in 7th.
No, it's not that. It's just you concern me because for those who don't know, who might be watching this for the first time, we do our own predictions every Thursday. And I don't think once when Paul has predicted us to win, we've gone on to win. However, every time he predicts us to lose, we always win. So he's cursed us.
I mean, I looked at it as sort of this very simplistic view of defences win championships. Now, listen, I know I haven't put Halifax up there to win the championship, but they're very miserly defensively. And if you're not going to let goals in, you're always got a chance of at least getting a draw. Now, my concern after speaking to you, Luke, is that they don't score enough goals. But I think Halifax have got that bit of experience. I don't know. I just got that feel. Aldershot Halifax could have been swapped around, but I just had that feeling with Halifax, with their defensive stability, will just push them into that last playoff place.
I hope you're correct, Paul, but I'm even more thinking now that negative, thinking we're not going to get into those playoffs. Anyway, 7th place for me. I've gone for Eastleigh, and that's might be a bit of a bold call considering where they are at the moment. They've never particularly been in the playoffs throughout the season, but like I've mentioned, there's still a long way to go, and I see them as a bit of a dark horse. Paul McCallum, a prolific goal scorer, and he certainly has been prolific this season. 22 goals he's scored so far. You've got Quigley, who's scored 9 behind him. You've got Maguire, who's obviously been in the SPL, and he's still showing at his age now that he's a very, very good player going forward with the goals and assists that he's produced. They've got a top goalkeeper who actually got the most clean sheets last season in Joe McDonald, joint with, I believe, Sam Johnson as well, who's at Halifax. And for me, I just look at the side and I think it's well balanced, and they're a side that can give anyone a game. We saw they went to Aldershot, a very difficult place to go. I think Aldershot have only lost twice at home all season. They go and put 5 past them. Not many sides will be capable of doing that this season. They gave Chesterfield a game as well. I think there was another side as well out there. Halifax away went 3-0 up against us. And I think overall, I look at them and I think it's a well-balanced side. I think they'll be better defensively in the second half of the season. Going forward, they're strong. Like we've mentioned, we don't particularly talk about them much. I don't think, we don't give them the credit that they deserve. I think the FA Cup money as well have clearly, I think, are a wealthy club that are capable of bringing in and attracting quite well-known players for this level. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them bringing in some more faces through the door. So for me, I look at Eastleigh and I do think they are a strong dark horse that could get into the playoffs come the end of the season. 6th place then, Paul. Who have you gone for?
Solihull Moors.
I've gone for Aldershot.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I mean, I was talking through that with you there, Luke. I didn't know whether I wanted to swap Halifax, Eastleigh and Aldershot around. But 6th place, I've gone Solihull Moors. Now, listen, they are absolutely romped away at the beginning of the season, didn't they, in terms of not losing. I know they probably drew too many to affect that very top spot, but they've had their dip, or it feels like they've had their dip and they've come back out of that and they're starting to improve again. I just think the teams above them would just be a bit more consistent. I've got a bit more threat. They're doing a great job up there at Solihull because that was a big rebuild in the summer, losing the manager, getting in a new director of football.
To go down. You're not getting away with that one. You predicted them to go down.
I did because I saw them at the back end of last season against Wealdstone where they'd shelled a few players and they'd recruited lads in from the lower leagues and they just looked hugely different to what we were expecting. Now, Neil Ardley was in charge at the time. He left either soon after or in the summer. I can't remember exactly when he left. And then they appointed Andy Wing, who isn't really known at this level. They brought in a director of football who's played in the AFL and Premier League, not at this level. It felt like the budgets had probably been cut, hence who they had recruited and let go. And I just felt, that if any club was sort of going to have that slide, a little bit like maybe Scunthorpe did, it looked like that's how Solihull was going, and they completely proved me wrong. So fair play to them. They've hit their blip. I think they've come out of that, and they're going to be consistent enough now to get into that playoff picture. So I put them in 6th place.
Well, I've gone for Aldershot in 6th. And if you ever want to watch an entertaining match of football, go and watch Aldershot because they are the league entertainers this season, probably alongside Chesterfield, I would say, and maybe Barnet. But from what I've seen from Aldershot, I think they're a very good side. And I know just because you're entertaining don't mean that you're going to necessarily finish in the playoffs, but it's not just about that. I look at the squad and I feel like Aldershot have kind of got the club back in a way, because for the last couple of seasons it has been dry. It's been a bit damp down there. Nothing seems to be going on. They've been hovering above the drop zone, where this season it feels like they've got a group of lads who clearly care. There's a connection between the fans and the players, the management team and the players and the fans as well there. And it seems to be bouncing again at the EBB, which is something that they've been missing for a number of years now. And I look at the balance within the squad. You've got Stokes, who's, I believe, still a teenager, and he's got into double digits this season. You've got Toloa, who's an actual goal scorer, who's a striker, an out-and-out goal scorer, scoring goals. Barham scoring goals. Those 3 players have all got into double digits, and we're only halfway through the season as well. And, you look at the rest of the squad, Hardfield's done well. They've got loads of different goal scorers. They haven't just got one goal scorer in the team that scores the majority of their goals. Throughout the team, there's loads of different goal scorers. And if you've noticed, they find ways to win. For example, I know I keep using my team, but Halifax at home, 0-0. It felt like they were never going to score. Last minute winner, boom, they go and win that game. And they never seem to give up. Bromley away, 2-0 down against one of the best defensive sides in the division. You go and win there 3-2. Not many sides are capable of doing that. I know there's questions about them defensively, but they've got Minoga, who I think's a very good centre-half, but also Magahoma, I think I've pronounced that correctly. When he was at Eastleigh, I respected him quite highly. Of course, he's been out injured for the first half of the season, and he's meant to be back very soon. So for me, I think the way they play kind of opens them up defensively more than them being poor defensively, if that makes sense. Because of the way they play, they're going to leave gaps at the back, and they kind of have that mentality that they're going to outscore teams, and I think we've seen that throughout the season as well. FA Cup run, I'm sure they'll get money from that to recruit, a bit like Eastleigh. I think they'll be able to attract a few more players too. And they've got quite a big, healthy squad. So for me, I think Aldershot will finish in 6th place come the end of the season. Now, 5th place, who have you gone for, Paul?
Altrincham.
I've gone for Solihull.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so sort of swapped around. Yeah, I mean, Altrincham, I understand where you're coming from, Luke, in terms of sort of putting them where you did. I mean, what I looked at was they've consistently just got slightly better right the way through the season. And, it bedded in new players. Obviously, they went full-time last year. So this is they're now fully into that. They were able to get Con Clark back, who slowly has got better and better and better. And I think you're quite right. If you lose a player like that, like Mancini at Hartlepool, it may affect their performances going forward. But at the moment, they haven't lost him, and he's playing well. And they're just a very well-run football club. And I think Phil Parkinson's very highly regarded, isn't he? I think he may well be in sort of the shortlist for the Notts County job coming up. And I know he's been spoken about on social media as a potential candidate. So they've got a very good manager. It's a very well-run football club that do go about their business just nice and calmly. And they are ultra consistent this season compared to last. I think that's what let them down last season, was they were a little bit erratic. But I can see Altrincham just staying where they are and getting results. And also, they're the type of football club that will attract clubs to loan players to them, which we've seen in the past. They play good football, based in the Northwest. They've got an awful lot of clubs around them that can feed them than players. So I think Altrincham are well placed to stay in that top 5 as long as they can keep their squad together. It doesn't appear they're going to lose any of their players like they did, with Cole Clough, etc. last year. So I'm going to stick my head out or stick my neck out rather and say Altrincham will stay in and around the playoffs and will be 5th.
Now, I'm putting Solihull in 5th place, dropping off slightly from 4th place at the moment. It's more because there's a side that I think are going to come really good that I think a lot of people will probably have worked out. But before we do that, I'll speak quickly about Solihull. The side that shocks me, I know I've took the mick out of Paul there for his prediction, but mine wasn't much better. I predicted them just to survive. And I think I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet, but I do remember, or find a way out of this situation. But I do remember saying it's going to go either way. They're either going to have an awful season or they're going to shock the entire division because it was just so unaware what was going to happen there. Neil Ardley had just left at wing. No one knew anything about the recruitment. A lot of the players were unknown at this level. They had quite a big clear out with the players, but it seems to have worked there. And they were unbeaten at home they were the longest beaten. I think only Chesterfield are the side that were unbeaten at home are still unbeaten at home now, but they were the second longest unbeaten side at home. And they were just becoming a very hard side to beat. And it were a place you kind of feared going because you knew you'd struggle there. Obviously, that's changed now, but they've adapted. I think away from home, they've improved compared to what they were. They're probably not as good as what they were in those first couple of weeks, but I think there's a few sides that I'm going to talk about shortly probably have dropped off compared to them, but they've had that dip like you've mentioned, and I think they've found a way out of it now. So for me, I think Solihull, they should be finishing inside these playoffs. It'd be a bit of a shock, I think, if they were to fall outside of the playoffs. 4th place then now. Who have you gone for, Paul?
I've gone for Oldham Athletic.
We're agreed on that one. And that's quite bold, isn't it, to put Oldham there?
But yeah, I mean, they're probably going to be the biggest sort of movers up. They're a club that have got the ability to flex their EFL muscle, if that makes sense. And Mickey Mellon has managed to get them playing. I think there was some stat around them winning the first time for however many years away from home for a certain amount of games. There was a stat that was quite compelling at the weekend. I wish I could remember it now, so I do apologise. But they're showing that the fact that they're a football team that should be up and in and around that top 3 or 4. And they're going to go into this second half. If they can improve their home form, which I know has been a little bit dreadful and a little bit worrying for the fans, then they're a force to be reckoned with. And clearly that you've got to look at them next year with Southend once we lose Chesterfield, maybe Bromley or Barnet, possibly Oldham. If they're still in the league, they're going to be a real threat and a favourite.
Yeah, they certainly are. Of course, there's questions about them maybe being able to get promoted this season. And Oldham, of course, are in the playoffs now for the first time since they entered into the National League. I think, of course, they had a bit of a difficult start to the season, and I still don't think they've hit that peak yet. I still think there's more to come from Oldham in the second half of the season. Of course, they had that managerial change, and it reminds me of the, maybe not to the same extent, but when Challoner replaced Rusker. Was it Rusker or was it Gannon who was at Stockport at the time? Stockport had a horrendous start to the season. They let the manager go. Challoner came in. They went on to win the league. Oldham, I don't think are going to win the league because Chesterfield are too good, and I think the sides above them, I think, have done enough for there to be a gap too hard for Oldham to catch them, or even have the ability to catch them. But I think since Mellon's come in, we've clearly seen an improvement there. 4 wins in the last 5. In the 12 games that Mellon has been at the club, he's averaged 2 points a game. 2 points a game is going to have you comfortably inside the playoffs. At the start of the season, it'd be second place the way it's going at the moment. I think if you're averaging 2 points a game, so if they can keep that up, I think Oldham are going to be a massive dark horse in the second half of the season, and I don't think they're going to be done with their recruitment yet. They're, like you've mentioned, they're going to flex their muscles and bring in more players and show the financial power that they've got that other clubs around them haven't, like your Solihuls, like your Altrinchams, those sides around them. I think this is where Oldham will peak. And I think, yeah, there's more. There's certainly going to be more to come from them. They've got a prolific goal scorer in Norwood. All they need now is probably a few more players in that midfield, and I think Oldham will be set to go and might be a shout for them to go up through the playoffs. Third place, then, who have you gone for?
Barnet. Purely because I think the two teams above them are slightly more consistent, slightly better defensively. But Barnet, they've got a lot of resolve about them. I know they've had a bit of a blip. Wealdstone, when Wealdstone beat them, and they picked up other that they sort of losing and drawing other games, and the FA Cup was the FA Cup tie that was on the telly, etc. So they've gone through that bad patch. They do show resilience. They find ways to get results. They don't give up. Dean Brennan has got a squad there that seems to want to play for him and the football club. They've got a good strength in depth now, which is what they didn't have last season, because I thought they were the most improved last season as well. But I just can't see them being better than the top two, which we'll talk about in a moment, purely because defensively they might be slightly more vulnerable. But clearly they are a good football team, and they're going to threaten that top three without a doubt.
I've agreed with you on Barnet, by the way. I'd agree with that. I think they had a very good start to the season. I think they were a massive game, weren't they, when they went to Chesterfield, and I went to watch that, and I thought they were a good side in that first half. But like I've said, I think Chesterfield are just a cut above on the day, and I think throughout the season they just have been. They're a different animal compared to Barnet, and I think what Barnet have got to focus on is cementing that top three in the top three now, and then having that one less game and that home draw in the semi-final. I think it's likely now they're going to be in the playoffs. I don't think that's going to be a concern for them. I think it's more now about solidifying yourself in that third place. Don't let any sides catch you. And maybe they can't afford to have that dip in form like we saw. Every club has it, unless you're a Chesterfield. And even them, I'm sure at one point, they'll lose one or two games at one point in the season. But every club, is going to have a bump in the road, and Barnet certainly did, and they didn't bounce back maybe like you'd expect them to. They then went and lost, I think, to Wealdstone, Oldham. They lost to it was Gateshead, Oldham, and Wealdstone. I think they lost to, and I think the game after that, I don't think they got back to winning ways either. I think they drew to Ebbsfleet. It was something like that. And a lot of questions were raised about them being a side that could maybe drop off and might not even finish inside the playoffs. I think they dropped down to fourth at the time, but they've done well to have themselves back in a good position at the moment. And, the 6 points above Solihull at the moment. So for me, I think Barnet, they'll finish third. They're just not quite as consistent as the two sides above them. I think everyone knows who we're going to predict to come second. I've gone for Bromley, Paul, in second place. Who have you gone for?
Yeah, I've gone for Bromley second, Chesterfield first. I think Bromley actually almost had their blip right at the beginning of the season. I saw them early on. We managed to sort of get a draw out of them down at Hayes Lane, and I sort of dissected that game with the Bromley fans online, and they were, showing a little bit of concern because Andy Woodman was trusting youngsters. He'd lost a couple of lads to the EFL, and loan players had gone back, and they weren't really firing, and it was looking concerning for them because of the expectation everyone had, the fact that they were in the playoffs the year before, and they're a strong defensive unit. They've got plastic pitch, all those sorts of things that we talk about. But boy, have they, since sort of from that very beginning of that season, they just, a little bit like Altrincham, they've just gone off to a different level. And Andy Woodman has got to be one of the managers of the season, if not the manager of the season. His recruitment seems to have been spot on. The integration into the squad with the young lads through their academy, he's doing a fantastic job. It might not be the prettiest football on the eye, but it's so effective. And if you were to say anyone, what would a National League team be like? It would probably be like Bromley. You know, that would be sort of
they are the definition of the National League, aren't they?
Archetypal sort of. That they've got strength, they've got pace, they've got power, they've got defensive solidity. They have sort of good centre forwards. They can play through the middle. They can play wide. They're very direct. You know, they're all 6 foot plus. Yeah, everything that you look at is it makes you realise why they are second in the league. And to be honest with you, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that Chesterfield were almost streets ahead of everybody else this season, then Bromley would obviously be leading it, because they are consistently the best team outside of Chesterfield.
Yeah, well, I'd agree. You know, I'm going to say this. When I saw Bromley on the opening day, I thought they were an average side. I didn't think too much to them at the time. I thought they're probably poorer than last season, the way that they're looking here. And, you know, I think there's always this question. It was similar with Boreham Wood. They're keeping the same old faces there, which they did to a certain aspect, but they also did bring in players through the academy, made 1 or 2 signings. I know there were a lot of talk about them losing Omar Sawamia, who was probably, I think, one of the best centre-halves last season. Of course, you've got to think about the Wrexham and Notts County centre-halves who were excellent, but I think he'd be in there for Bromley last season, and he was a big loss. But I love the way that they'll go and just bring in a player from another club, or they'll find someone out there, and it's like, bye, Sawamia, we don't need you anymore. We've got a replacement, and they just all do their jobs. They all work for each other. They work so hard. They're probably one of the most hard-working sides in this division. Yes, it's not the most prettiest, and I go back to saying there that I didn't think too much to them. The majority of sides who play against them, win or lose against them, probably won't think alt to them, because they're a side that just grind out results, and they're not the prettiest footballers, but it's a results game at the end of the day, and they get the results that they need. And yeah, I know a lot of people will probably say when they come up against them, we could have beaten them today. But the thing that Bromley have is they have that, you know, winning mentality, and they keep having that. And, you know, it's unlikely now. There's still a chance maybe they could win the league, but it's very unlikely, and it would take a lot of a major drop-off from Chesterfield for Bromley to overtake them. But what they've got to do is keep doing what they're doing, have form going into those playoffs. And I think they would be the favourites at the moment to go up through the playoffs. And there's a lot of talk about them being that side that could join Chesterfield come the end of the season. First place then. Oh, this is probably one of the best ones to predict. I've gone for Chesterfield. Who have you gone for, Paul?
Yeah, Chesterfield. It's not that I don't want to talk about it, but everything we've said about them has been said. They're just a very, very good football team. They've got a very, very good football manager. They've clearly got the ability to fund decent players. They are an EFL team in waiting. You know, they took Watford, who are a informed championship side, close on Saturday in the FA Cup at Vicarage Road, and that just goes to show how good Chesterfield are. They're a pleasure to watch. They're a good team, and yeah, they're there to be beat. They're going to have to play 100% every game, because everyone's going to look at it as almost like their sort of cup final, you know. And they seem to pull out results. So I think the other day they were 2-0 down, was it, to Solihull, and they won 3-2.
Done it a few times, though, have it? It's not just that game.
Yeah.
They've done it a few times.
But I think it summed it up when you look at their scorers in Cole, Clough, Grigg and Denton. And you think, well, if I can have those 3 on my team sheet and those 3 on my, you know, as my scorers, that sort of goes to show the quality that they have. And Paul Cook has proven doubters wrong, because he had a really sticky patch last year, didn't he, Luke? And there was talks about him potentially being fired, and fans weren't happy. They stuck with him. They recruited well in this time last year, pushed on, didn't quite get promoted, and this year they're going to do it.
They're out of place, aren't they? I think in this division now. They've probably overstayed their welcome. They've always been too big for this division. There's a lot of sides that I think are. Maybe that's a bit arrogant. Again, you know, someone saying clubs are too big for a division, because I don't think you can ever say that. You're in the division you should be in. but they've certainly always been a side that you thought, with the crowds they get, the setup there, they should be in the Football League, I think. And I think this is their time now. We said last season, Notts County and Wrexham got promoted. A lot of Notts fans came on afterwards and saying next year it'll be Chesterfield's time. And I think you could see it a mile off this season that this was the possibility. Maybe we thought a side had maybe challenged them a little bit more, but they're just a different animal compared to everyone else. And I think when they do inevitably get promoted come the end of the season, they'll probably have it wrapped up by probably March time, February, March time. When they do inevitably get promoted, I don't think there'll be a side that'll do what Wrexham have done, that'll do what Notts have done, that'll do what Stockport have done, and we'll be looking to get promoted again into League One come the end of the season. And I personally think if you stuck Chesterfield in League One now, I think they'd survive comfortably in League One, the way they're playing and the calibre of players that they've got at the squad at the moment. Paul, anything to add before we wrap things up?
No. Thanks for that challenge. It's always interesting to sit there and to work it through. And if I'm honest, Luke, and anyone that is going to watch this and has an opinion that any team could have been swapped around 2 or 3 places in and around where we've chosen them. I think, Oldham is the biggest mover up, and Gateshead were the biggest mover down. But apart from that, there's an argument that teams could be in a number of different places. So we'll see how we go. It's a good league. It's a brilliant league to watch. It's a very even league, and on their day, any team can beat anybody, maybe apart from Chesterfield, but we saw Solihull sort of prove that over the Christmas period. So I'm just looking forward to the back end of this season and seeing how all these teams get on.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good to update our predictions. There are 1 or 2 bold ones in there. For myself, probably Eastleigh and maybe Altrincham not finishing in the playoffs, and maybe I think Gates. And I know we've put quite a strong case together, but still, it's quite a major drop off there. Like we've mentioned, we've talked quite a lot about Oldham and them being a dark horse, and I think it's quite I think we've backed it up quite well to put them in 4th place. But for you guys who have been watching, please remember to like and subscribe, but also let us know what your predictions are in the comments. Also, give us some feedback on our predictions. Tear into us if you would like. It's all about the algorithm, isn't it, guys? I'm only joking, but yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you to everyone that's watched, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.